it's like, yes, Jesus loves our whole selves, but what is the point of ourselves? Like, what is the point of acknowledging, yes, I am white, yes, I am black? Like, what's the point of that?
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Called and Unqualified, a Create Worship Inspire video series. If you don't know me already, my name is Brenna and I'm unqualified to be an expert of any kind, especially when it comes to faith and politics. And today I don't like to play favorites with guests, but you're probably one of my favorites because you're
Oh,
like one of my best friends ever and you're a huge part of my testimony and I love recording with you. So today we have one of my best friends. We have Autumn.
hi. Hi, I'm Autumn, and I'm here with Brenna. She's my favorite person on the face of this earth. So,
Oh my
yeah,
goodness. I'm gonna
I'm
cry.
glad to be here. Glad to be here. Hey, what's up, everyone?
Just an FYI, like this is I think our third episode that we've done together.
Yes.
And your other two are casual Fridays.
Mhm.
But most of at least like a third to half of the episode is usually us just telling each other how much we love each other. Like I so
Pretty much.
I hope that's more encouraging than annoying to the listeners. But Autumn legit is a huge part of my testimony, and especially with what we're going to be talking about today, I feel like has been a very long journey that we've taken together,
Mhm.
and something that I just had a lot of questions this week just about life in general, and I was asking my sister about it, and it was really interesting because my sister said, like, I don't know, I think you should ask someone that has a spiritual gift of discernment. And you immediately popped in my head
Oh,
because as long as I've known you, there'd be something you're like, Brenna, I don't know, there's something about this feels off, or I don't know about this person, something feels off. And then I kid you not, there has yet to be a time where your conviction is wrong.
hey,
It's
that's cool.
yeah, so I
No.
definitely think that you have the spiritual gift of discernment. So I love you.
Oh,
I
thank you.
don't.
I love you too. I love that you have the gift of love and that you love people even like when I'm like, no, I don't think you should, and you're like, no, everyone is worthy of love, and I really admire that about you. So that's I love you.
Yes,
Yeah.
autumn has definitely helped me build boundaries because
Hey,
it's like, hey, if it really sucks to set boundaries with this person after you let them in so much, like maybe let's just be careful with the people that we let in. And I was like,
yeah.
wow, what a concept.
Wow, who'd have thought?
So today I feel like we're going to be talking about a pretty big topic that I don't even know how to preface it because it is such a big thing, especially within the church.
Mhm.
And I know you and I have had some pretty strong feelings about it and have gone through this together. So when I asked you what you wanted to do an episode about, you almost immediately knew what you wanted to do.
Yeah. And I mean, really, we've been talking about this, doing this for a while, because last time when you asked, like, oh yeah, what do you want to do for an episode, I was like, oh, I want to talk about like culture. And what was that, like 7 months ago? And so now it's just like snowballed, and it feels like there's just so much more to talk about, like in that vein. And so yeah, I guess we're going to be talking about the modern culture and all of the lovely things that come with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have had so many, and I don't know genuinely if it's just gotten more prevalent in our culture or if we've just become more aware. But it seems like even within the church, and then your and my experience with campus ministry in
Mhm.
college has had this huge focus of race.
Mhm.
But it's interesting to me because like the Bible in general doesn't avoid talking about race. Like we talk about Jews and Gentiles, but that's definitely not how it's framed in modern day.
Yeah. Like now there's like so many different little boxes and stuff. There's like every single combination that you can think of is a valid race, you know? It's like you can be like every single race under the sun. Like, I don't know, by blood? I don't know, I guess.
Yeah.
No, it's just weird to me personally. I think it's a little bit out there, especially like when it's like the race that's based on skin color, like, oh yes, I'm black, I'm white, I'm brown. I'm like, and my hair is brown. Like, what's, I don't know. I feel like the genetic line is a little bit more just like, I don't understand why the skin color is a big deal. I can understand the culture more and I can understand nationality more than I can just like genetic biological race. I don't know. It's just it's just weird to me. I don't really know how to describe it, I guess.
No, yeah, I would agree with you because I was thinking about that and the whole reason where specifically in the New Testament where Jesus is where our salvation isn't based off of works and the law and it's based off of forgiveness and admitting the fact that there is no possible way for us to quote unquote be good enough
Mm,
to earn our way to salvation, like it still talks about race. But the reason that I feel like especially Paul talked about race a lot was because like you were saying, it was a culture difference. And so now that we have in our modern day, like the closer that we're getting into the book of Revelation of like this one world government, and the
mm,
more culture starting to become blended and globalization is starting to become a thing, and we're all starting to get on the same page. Like, yes, there is a huge culture difference still, but not nearly as much before, especially with like next door neighbors.
mm,
Um, that almost doesn't eliminate the race difference, but it makes it less of an issue
yeah.
because, yeah, I don't know. What were, I guess, some of your thoughts on that?
See, I'd really love to think like, oh no, it's not really like globalization. It's just like the Western world, right? But like even the Western world is like the entire US and like all of Europe, which is like kind of half of the human population on Earth. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess if half the world is all thinking and doing the exact same thing, then I guess it's not going to take long for the other half to fall under, I guess. Um, but I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
I have like a lot of thoughts like swirling around about
yeah,
that.
I definitely get that. I think one of my experiences, if we're going to what I would say falsely assign, I guess, a way of thinking and experiencing in relation to a certain like skin color, I
Mhm.
had a professor this last semester who was educated at an Ivy League, and just hearing him speak, I had a thought where it's like if we're doing that false, um I guess if we're falsely categorizing a way of thinking with a certain ethnicity,
Yeah.
like you would technically be more white than I would based off of your thought process right now.
Mhm.
And something interesting to me is since I have moved out of my home state of California into Texas, I have a very difficult time relating to white conservative Christians, which is technically what I am. And I have the most, I have the easiest time relating to some of the Latino, Latina, and Black population in Texas, which really blew my mind. And that had more to do with the culture that I grew up in. I guess with that, growing up in California, there was a lot of like racial and even cultural diversity
Mhm.
um, where I grew up, but I guess race wasn't really a huge concern. Like I didn't really see it as a bad thing. I experienced, in the public school system growing up, whenever we would talk about the United States history with slavery, I would definitely, feel guilty and like my heart would hurt. But it wasn't really something that started to become, I guess, wasn't told to me was super important until we got into college.
Mhm.
And yes, it was really prevalent in the classroom, but that's kind of expected from a liberal leaning university. Um, I don't think our university is super crazy compared to some others, but they definitely do have their political affiliations. But
Okay.
something that was really, really strange to me was in our campus ministry, our freshman year especially, that was a huge shock to me.
Yeah, it's the campus ministry. It's like it's all very sweet, very nice, wonderful people who I know like are there for Jesus, but there's just some things like from the beginning. Like this is one of the things that Rena was talking about earlier. This is one of the places that I was like, I don't know about this. This feels kind of hipster. And as it went along, it just, especially over this last year, like there's just been a lot of talk about race and ethnicity, which, I mean, whatever, fine. I mean, I guess that is still technically part of us, and that is still technically part of like this world that we live in. And so I think it should be talked about. But I don't know, one of the things that they would say is like, oh yeah, you need to like accept your ethnicity, and like Jesus accepts your whole self, and all of you is important to Jesus. And uh if you're Asian, or if you're black, or if you're white, like Jesus loves all of you, like your entire self, including that ethnicity. And he wants to like bring that, you know, bring like some, I don't know what, like glorify it, I guess. um I'm not sure exactly the word that they would use, but it's just this like, yeah, we should love that part of ourselves too. And to an extent, I get that, but it just, I don't know. It's like they don't, it feels like it just doesn't address the point of it. It's like, yes, Jesus loves our whole selves, but what is the point of ourselves? Like, what is the point of acknowledging, yes, I am white, yes, I am black? Like, what's the point of that? Especially in America, where every single nationality, every single race, every single ethnicity lives under this Star Spangled Banner, you know? Like, what's the point of it here? I mean, in other countries and stuff, I mean, I don't know. It's just,
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me because even like I always it's just like the color of something. It's like, okay, if our culture is mixed enough, and I'll admit, like, yeah, our university had a lot of international students, especially from the eastern half of the world. And so they had a different perception of just subjects in general with their personal experience. And that was like such great diversity. But the
yeah.
interesting thing to me was they didn't really have a Bible study for them. Like there was an international students ministry, but it was just more for the language barrier. But it
Mm,
wasn't for like focused on culture. And then there have been studies done where even people with different hair colors have different experiences. Like they are just treated differently, which honestly, I don't think should be that way, but that's just the reality. And it's like, okay, well, if we're going to have these Bible studies broken up by race, why don't we have it broken up by hair color or even occupation? Like, why aren't we focusing on if you're going to divide people, divide them based off of spiritual gifts if you're going to do that? And
mm.
it's
Or
just like,
spiritual needs. I think it'd
or
be better to
spiritual
divide
need.
them on spiritual
Yeah,
needs.
exactly. So it's just like someone struggling in the same way. It's like, why are we only focusing on race?
Mhm.
Almost like our struggles are only attached to our race.
Yeah,
And
which really, no, our struggles are not attached to our race at all. Like, our struggles are attached to our sin. And maybe we've been hurt by people, other people's sin, and maybe that other person's sin was racism or some other ism that's popular right now. Like, maybe that is the case, but.
And I remember we won't share the name of the ministry because even though I personally have a lot of complaints, I don't know how Autumn would place herself if it was a scale on like, yes, I love this group, or I probably wouldn't have gotten involved if I knew all of this. Like, I won't speak for Autumn, but
Yeah.
for me, there were definitely good things about this group. Like, this
Mm.
group was where God used me to really make my faith my own with him, like take responsibility for that relationship with him. So I don't want to like say this group shouldn't exist. And really, any group that is made of people, unfortunately, is going to have brokenness in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's healthy for groups to disagree. Personally, for me, there was just too much that didn't feel right. So I did have to step away. And some of my lifelong friends are still a part of this group. And I always hope to love them and be loved by them. But one of the interesting things that this group decided to do, I'm guessing, is prompting from the national organization. So, not just our campus in particular,
Mm-hmm.
but was to start a like Bible study on white identity. But the interesting thing was it was half let's celebrate our identity and half let's really focus on the brokenness, and it felt more politically charged than biblically charged. But something that I realize in hindsight now is I think Autumn and I were one of three, like females made up about half of the group. And that
Yeah.
was
Now it's
such,
predominantly female.
oh, that group to me, it's so interesting, like just looking back in hindsight, because it was so hard for us to bond together. It didn't feel open because our none of us placed our race as our primary identity,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't pass that. If we're only focusing on that, we didn't really have a lot in common. But when you took all of those friends that were in that group into, let's say, our large group or a small group or a retreat, if we all got boba together, we totally had fun. And it's like we had things in
Yeah.
common, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like not in that area.
Yeah. It feels like, especially, I mean, I guess I'll only speak for white folks at this point. But it feels like race just really is alienating. Just like trying to identify yourself like with the color of your skin is just kind of alienating. And that kind of, it reminds me of like the Tower of Babel. Like that's when like everything like really got started, because there was all of these people. They're finally like on the earth populating. God told them, "Go, be fruitful, fill the earth," and they said, "I think we're all gonna stay here and build a tower instead because we are totally all united to each other and we love each other and this is awesome." And God said, "No, I told you to spread out to be fruitful. And if you're not going to do that, then I'm going to intentionally divide you by race, effectively, by nationality. Like, I'm going to split you into different groups so that you can't communicate with each other if that's what it's going to take for you to obey my rules." So it's like, I feel like race and ethnicity, this whole identity that is that, uh, is intentionally alienating, like, to us. Like, if we try to unite to like our skin colors or our ethnicities or even our nationalities, like that is specifically and intentionally alienating. And sometimes that's good to like form a group of like, yes, like as Americans, like we form this group and we say like, yes, we believe in this and this and this and this, and like this is us. And I mean, I guess it's still a little bit alienating, but I don't know. I think it's a good curse, you know? It's like a blessing that is a curse and a curse that is a blessing, because if we had all stayed together, like we'd still be disobeying God's rule. We'd all still be trying to unite through like what we can do and
Yeah.
what we can unite to each other. So that was really like a uniting to each other rather than uniting to God.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, I can just having you explain that brought up like just a couple thoughts. And one of them
yeah.
is like this whole division was born out of sin and
Mm,
disobedience. So continuing to focus on it is
yeah.
probably focusing on the brokenness that we caused.
Yeah,
And
right?
then just with the Bible studies specifically, um, it wasn't, it was more us focused. It wasn't let's put aside the hurt so we can surrender this to God. It was more let's focus on this, but it almost felt more isolating.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed studying other cultures and having those tough conversations with people of other it's like, if this is such a big roadblock to you to relate to others, can you please explain that to me? And we weren't given that space. There
Mhm.
wasn't any. It's like, if you believe that this is such a big barrier, why aren't we creating spaces for us to relate to each other?
Mhm.
um and then language that you were talking about, the Tower of Babel, where it was like, okay, you're going to be disobedient. um I'm going to, like, there's going to be natural division that happens as a consequence.
Yeah.
um Language, I'll see if I can link the TED Talk in the description to wherever the audience is listening to this episode. But my freshman year, in one of my classes, we watched this video on how the language we speak actually does influence the way we see the world. And so that makes sense to me, like that
Yeah, that
cultural
really
divide of language. But it's like, why aren't we dividing ourselves and studying our view through language? Like, why is it? Because, like, I there are so many, like, the Jewish people, for example, are literally, because they were scattered everywhere, like my ancestors were scattered everywhere. Now, like, it's so confusing because the Jews are a race of people, but it's also a faith, but they're also, I guess the Jews are an ethnicity, but they're not one race. Like, they're a
yeah,
nation, but they're like literally all shapes, sizes, colors, languages, everything. And God still united them. Like,
yeah.
most of them live in the nation of Israel. And so, to me alone, that shows, like, yeah, race and this kind of division are really, it's focusing on our flesh rather than our spirit. And I do think it's important to acknowledge how people are unique and different, so we can see different spiritual gifts, so we can meet them where they are rather than selfishly focusing on where we are. But that wasn't how I feel like I experienced that beginning of college.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another little thing I want to touch on that kind of builds on what you just said is this idea of like racial reconciliation, of like, for some reason the races need to like reconcile to each other, but you know, like you said, like this was an intentional division. Like this was something that's there. This is something that is broken. The fact that we are divided means that we are broken, but it also means that like God has mercy for us. And so this like idea of like racial reconciliation is like, are we supposed to be reconciling to each other because of our race that God intentionally gave us to divide us? Or should we be reconciling to God, who's going to use our races for something that is something bigger in his purpose? Like those, the verse that people use, the we are called to a ministry of reconciliation. Like it's not reconciliation to each other. Like that's not the most important thing. It's reconciliation to God. And through God, He unites us. So rather than us saying, oh, we're going to come together and build this Tower of Babel, like it's God saying, no, you're going to come to me and I'm going to build my kingdom with you. And I think that is something that is really missing.
I think it's interesting just with that Tower of Babel, like, just kind of realization of how God, I was like, why did we need to scatter the earth? And it's like, to, like, share truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're getting, I think, I personally, this may be an unpopular opinion in, I guess, the group that I'm supposed to fit in with, but just with the way that I grew up, I really don't like being around people that think like me. I don't, well, I enjoy having conversations with people that are closer to the same page as myself in train of thought and in way of thinking and in beliefs. But I feel I really like having deep conversations with people that don't think like me, because it helps me see where they're at and it also tests what I think is true. It helped me find more truth. And this, one of the really interesting things is it was really, really mind blowing to me that I feel so uncomfortable in Texas because it is a culture shock. I've been telling some of my friends in the last week, I genuinely believe you could pick me up, drop me in the middle of Afghanistan, and I would feel more at home than I do in Texas right now. Because I grew up hearing so many different languages, and like even the smallest things, since I'm visiting back home in California right now, walking by some of my neighbors' homes and just smelling the spices that are coming from like the air vents in the house, like that feels like home to me. Or listening to Arabic music, which is like, if you're hearing me talk, you can probably hear I am not ethnically Arabic. And so, I'm not fluent in Arabic, but the culture, the sounds, the really that like Middle Eastern hospitality, like that feels like home to me. And so it has been such a huge shock to me with how foreign Texas feels. And it literally looks like I should fit in. And on paper seems like I should fit in. And that's why I was so excited to move to Texas. But it's different. But there's that blessing is because out in Texas, they look at me and they're like, you're one of us. Or going through college and people hearing, like, God's put it on my heart to minister to international communities here in the United States. And I had a lot of liberal leaning friends politically that's like, oh, you're one of us. And so we were given that blessing of diversity and even in our ethnicity where God can use us to minister to other people. So I think there is that blessing of that's why he wanted us to scatter, was to just share truth with the rest of the world that doesn't know it yet. And now that Jesus has come, that truth takes form in love and grace.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that is a really beautiful description. And I was kind of thinking about like, go with me. So I was thinking about like in Genesis when he's like creating all the animals. And like if you think about it, he created a very diverse population of animals, a very diverse population of plants, diverse population of insects, but then he created one man and one woman. And they can only be one ethnicity, and that is human, I guess. And then after Babel, you have people that are as diverse as the animals and the plants. And so it's like if you look at the birds of the sky and at the flowers of the lilies of the valley, like he talks about in those verses in Matthew, like there is so much beauty and so much truth in just the diversity of the world that we live in. And there's a lot of beauty and diversity in the people too. Like I think it kind of made it so that we could see different facets, I suppose, just like in people. And so if you have people that are different and people that have different views, then they're going to have different ideas of like what God is and what he does and of his love for us. They're going to have different perceptions of his love. They're going to feel it differently. They're going to experience it differently. And I think that's really cool. Some people might have a different god, but it's like still interesting to like hear like about it and be like, oh, like it's like, yes, diversity is like a really cool and beautiful thing to just like hear so many different things, but that doesn't mean every single thing you hear is good. It doesn't mean every single thing is beautiful, but it gives you like a perception of like this and this, like there's two separate things. I don't know, it's like it's hard to explain, but it's like if you hear something wrong, you can be like, oh yeah, that's definitely because we have the knowledge of good and evil. Like we ate the fruit, we have the knowledge of good and evil. And so even just like the ability to recognize that, like the serpent said, like, hey, this will make you like God if you eat from this. Like the recognition of what is good and what is evil, the fact that we can recognize that is another mercy of God, you know like like what do you do with that? Like you God says what is good and evil, and he knows it all, and he knows every single thing that is good, and he knows every single thing that is evil. And the fact that he allows us to be able to recognize that, the fact that we can look at the world and say, oh, that's evil, oh, that's good, that like that's another just mercy of God. And like if you don't have diversity, then you're not going to see the good and the evil. Like you're only going to see one specific thing, and you might not even recognize it as being on a spectrum of good or evil. Like, you know, Adam and Eve, like they were like, oh yeah, we're naked, that's cool. Like that doesn't mean anything to me, but you know, you know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah, totally. Well, that just makes me go back to thinking of, in gosh, I don't want to say what century because I'm going to get it wrong. But
Okay.
like all of the nations governments that say they are quote unquote Christian, that have like a definite religion.
Mm,
If you've ever had the privilege of speaking to someone that's lived in a country that has a defined faith or religion, um, and your faith is very important to you. So to me, I would like to say Jesus is, or I try to make him the most important thing to me in my life, like the most important relationship and person. Um, and so when we traveled to Italy my freshman year, which was like the biggest trip that I'd ever taken,
mm-hmm.
um, for school, um, I talked to some of the friends that I made over in Italy, and the Italian government has their defined faith as Christianity, like Catholicism, which this whole nother episode would categorize as a different faith because I'm a Protestant Christian. But anyway, talking to them, they don't really know what they believe because it's like I was born as an Italian, so I'm a Catholic. I'm a Christian. And so we were given that difference and that diversity to really test to like see what's true. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's such a blessing. And so for those of my friends that have not accepted Jesus yet, I had just over quarantine in 2020, was praying for a church family, and I was literally blessed with the most incredible church family in California, and then I moved to Texas. But I always used to say non-believers, and I do think that that's a biblical term in the English translated versions. I'm almost certain it's in Romans somewhere, non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
But the church that I was going to when I was back here in California, the pastor would say, "Are yet to believe friends." And
Oh,
I love that because we don't know who and when God is going to bring more children into his spiritual family. And so I just absolutely love that. And so when we're talking about this diversity, I just think of I have, a couple friends that I know you and I have known since freshman year that have been continuing to ask us questions that
mm-hmm.
haven't yet accepted Jesus. And
Yeah.
then I have a friend out in Texas who, bless his heart, has let me know that he has been binge watching my podcast while I've been gone, asks
Oh.
me some of the deepest, most incredible questions ever. And it's actually helped me strengthen my faith. And it's like, how how great is God that God is going to use one of my yet to believe friends who's just asking questions out of morbid curiosity to bring me closer to him. And so that's why I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to anger some conservatives, but I mean, what's new?
Go for it.
I love diversity because the diversity of thought is so important to me because God uses that. One of the examples for the ministry that Autumn and I have had some frustrations with throughout college, one of the really incredible things that I loved was when we were on a retreat and we were doing worship. And because our ministry on the West Coast is so ethnically and culturally diverse, they encouraged us when we were playing or when we were singing a worship song one night to all sing in our native languages, our first languages, because no matter how many languages that you learn, your native language that you grew up speaking is going to be the one that speaks to your heart the loudest. All the rest of them do go to your brain and can make sense, but that's the one that your heart is kind of wired in that language. And so we stood there. My native language is English, and um, they were encouraging us to just sing in our native languages, and everybody sang. And even though they all sounded different, there were a handful of different languages. um, it was just beautiful. And one of the worship leaders said, "This is what heaven is going to sound like. Or
Mm-hmm.
every tongue will confess, every knee will bow." And that was just an incredible experience to me. So I love diversity because I grew up around it. I can understand in the same way that I'm uncomfortable around a lot of people that look like me, and only speak English. In the same way that I'm uncomfortable with that, they probably feel uncomfortable with some cultural diversity, which breaks my heart. But I'm sure them hearing about me talking about all this breaks their hearts too. But it's okay, we'll still be friends. Um, I'm learning, I'm growing.
You're such
God
a
is growing me to be more patient and more resilient. Praise Jesus.
yes.
But yeah, I don't know. That was a really wild tangent. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have a thought that's a little bit of a contrast, I guess. Yeah, so when you were talking about that, I was thinking of, that same night, because that was really cool. I enjoyed that, but I think personally what I found myself doing was trying to sing in the different languages, and that was just, it turned it, I feel like it kind of, for me at least, turned it into more of a works thing. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm like practicing diversity, look at me, I'm singing these other languages, ooh. And I just I don't speak any of these languages. I have no clue what any of those words meant. I don't know what any of the sounds were. I didn't even know if I said it right. Like, and I think that kind of can become one of the traps of diversity. It's like, it is, like we've been saying, like, it is a good thing and it is a beautiful thing, but it can also be a dangerous thing. And I think this is one of the struggles that I've had with this group, uh, is this passage in First Corinthians, I believe, where he's talking about like how this church should be run. And he says like, hey, you should speak in the language that everyone is going to understand. And if you have something in a different language that nobody else is going to understand, then you need someone to translate it. And I'm like, yeah. And I think, that night there was definitely like a translation like written down, but I don't know, there was still just like a disconnect in that, because it was like, yes, sing in your native language, but also we have these three written down here. And so you can pick one of these three if you don't know it. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know about that. And so this passage in Corinthians is something that I have talked to this group about a number of times, because I just haven't gotten a satisfying answer yet. It just like, if we're leading worship, what is the purpose of worship? Like, that really is the question. What is the purpose of worship? What is the purpose of going to church? What is the purpose of that? What is the purpose of singing as one? You know? Like, what's the purpose of that? Is it to recognize that we're all different? Is it to celebrate our languages? Is it to celebrate our cultures and where we're from? No, it's to worship God. And if your congregation can't understand the words that they're singing, then you've just made liars out of all of them. You know, like, people lie the most when they sing. That's what our one of our worship pastors used to say when we were leading the choir and stuff. He would say, people lie the most when they sing. So are you going to make your entire congregation into liars because they have no clue what they're singing because you're asking them to sing in a different language? Like, like, this is something that I think about a lot, uh, especially when I was trying to lead worship. They'd be like, "Oh, do some Mandela, do like this other song, do one in Zulu, do one in Japanese or whatever," and I'm like, no, I don't know those languages. Those don't speak to me. We don't have anyone here who speaks Zulu. Why would I do a song in Zulu? Like, it's a beautiful song. I love it. It's one of my favorites. But that's not the purpose of this worship session. This worship session is not to invite people of different diverse groups. The purpose of this worship is to praise God. And if the people coming can't understand what I'm saying, then it's just alienating them more. And it is turning it into a work thing. And it is turning into, oh, we believe in diversity instead of we believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who died on the cross to save our sins. You know? Like, so yeah, it's the thing about diversity is you need to like look at the purpose of it. And I think that's what uh has been missing from a lot of conversations. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely think so. You were definitely in a different position because you were one of our worship leaders. But I can definitely tell where you're coming from. I I had the same thought too, because my thing is like I like diversity, or just not forgetting about it, because that's how we can meet people where they are, even
Mhm.
if diversity is referring to life experience. So just like I grew up in a different part of town. I was exposed to more crime growing up, or I had it pretty good. Like my parents stayed together for my entire life. I grew up in the same house. I've always gone to the same church. Like those are diverse experiences.
Mhm.
So like meeting people where they are. But if there's it all goes back to the purpose, like you were saying. If
Mhm.
you are holding a worship session as training to, let's say you do have a Zulu speaker, like you were saying, as a part of the group, absolutely that makes sense to do a song in Zulu because that is meeting them where they are. But if no one there speaks that language, and it's actually I like idolizing the act of, oh, look at me, like I'm being a bigger person, I'm diverse, like I'm making this effort rather than God, I love you. Like
Mhm.
I'm reflecting on your character and your grace and who you are. And I just feel so humbled to be in your presence right now because I am so broken. Like those are entirely two different heart postures. And
Yeah.
so it does depend on the context of like, why are we doing this? And so I agree with you. Like, I do think that especially the modern church, or it's we always focus on unhealthy idols, when that was a very like repetitive phrase because idols are unhealthy, but like those very obvious like drugs, alcoholism, sex, yeah, or I
Money,
should say
fame, riches.
premarital sex,
Yes.
like those things are like we should not be even touching those as people that are supposed to be reflecting Christ. But there are also like Satan is crafty. So something that I've been struggling with for a while that has led to things like burnout that then hinder me from continuing to serve as well as I could are idolizing things like ministry, because it is idolizing works, and that is
Mhm.
like it's not truthful of who Christ is and who we are. And so I would absolutely agree with you. It's like, yeah, diversity is a good thing, but there can be things can be idolized.
Mhm.
And so like
So
ministries,
easy to idolize
it's
things. Like,
so
it's
easy.
so easy. Like, you can literally idolize the act of not idolizing something. You're like, oh yeah, I don't drink. I'm so,
Exactly.
like, even that's an idol. Like, literally, I don't. That's something that I struggle with like so much. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't do this. I don't do this. I don't do this. And I'm like, I'm such a prideful, arrogant, terrible person.
That was honestly, I feel like that was one of the blessings that God brought us into each other's lives for, was because I met you and I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like I was so afraid that you were going to judge me because I'd like actually like been through crap. So, and you would just hear me talk sometimes and be like, "You went through what?" It's like, "What happened?" No, yeah. I mean, and God is good. I mean,
We
honestly, within your and my friendship, there's diversity because you and I have different spiritual gifts. You and I, bless your heart, when I was just thinking about this the other day, like really when I've been almost at my lowest of lows, you sat with me and you were like, I don't get it, but I love you.
Yeah.
And so that alone, like,
I feel like that's a lot of our friendship. Is I have no clue what the problem is right now. I will help you fix it if that's what you need, but also like I have no clue what's happening.
but honestly, like that's great because that's you using your spiritual gifts, and Lord knows we've grown each other
Oh
throughout
yeah.
this. I remember when you like just where you are just blows my mind because I remember freshman year where we would pray. I was like, Autumn, do you want to pray? And you're like, no.
No.
And you're like, maybe later. And
Yeah.
so, and it's like, it's not that you didn't pray, it was just praying out loud was just it was nerve wracking. But then, but God,
But
like,
God.
but God, I think it was after we started leading a Bible study together freshman year. That was when I think I was sitting there one night and it was just like, you were like, who wants to pray? And you're like, okay, I guess no one wants to pray. I will. And I was like, amen. I was like, praise God.
Yeah. I mean, at my church that's like definitely I think kind of a common thing of like everyone is just kind of like they're like, oh, who wants to pray for us, who wants to pray us out, and everyone's like, I don't know what you're talking about, what's praying? You know, like that was definitely like just kind of what we all did because we were all just shy children who had no clue about anything, especially me, and there would always be like one kid who's like, I'll do it. And, you know, or they'd be like, all right, you do it because I know you and you've been in Awanas. And I'm like, I've never been in Awanas. No one is ever going to pick me to pray out loud, you know, which like, right now I'm like, man, I really wish I'd done Awanas, but I didn't do Awanas. So, and I just have to actually study the Bible on my own, which is like,
Guess who's doing Awanas now?
who is?
Guess
Not
who's
me.
working Awana? Aren't
Awana.
you?
I was working VBS.
Oh, same thing.
Same
Same.
thing.
No, it's so cool just in the it feels like I've known you for like most of my life. But in
It feels like I've
reality
known you forever.
it's been like 3 years. Can you
3
believe that? It's only been 3 years.
Man, we've got a lot of friendship done in 3 years.
You're welcome. That is I don't even know what season of this reality show that is my life we're on right now.
I
Um
guarantee you it's at least season 5. In the last 3 years, we are on season 5.
Autumn is definitely one of the main characters that's introduced during the intro.
Oh,
For sure. Oh my goodness.
should
But
make
yeah.
a TV show. It'd be fun.
Oh my gosh. Do you have anything that you want to add?
It's not that it isn't important to like, you know, like, let's see, because I'm thinking of this phrase like in the world, not of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like we are still part of this world. We are still people with nationalities and people with beliefs and people in a culture. Like we are still part of this world, um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be completely of this world. So it's like, yes, you can be a white person. Yes, you can be a black person because that's what you are. So you can be a black person. You can be a white person. All of those things are what you are. But you know, the thing that people say like, oh, just be colorblind, or no, don't be colorblind, is like it's not about being blind to an aspect of someone's person. It's about not making it the sole first thing you have to notice right off the bat. You know, like if the first thing I see about you is, oh yeah, you have black skin, that's cool. If the first thing I see about you is, oh, you have white skin, that's cool. Like no one is actually like completely colorblind. We're all gonna see your skin color. Like, I mean, there are people that are technically colorblind, but that's usually like red and green, you know, colorblind. So it's like yeah, I mean, you're still a black person, I'm still a white person, he's still an Asian person. Like, okay, if it comes to a point where the cultural differences is making it a problem, talk about it, figure it out. Like, it's really not as big a deal, I think, as a lot of people want it to be. You know, like, the color of your skin does not dictate anything about your human value or your intellect. Like, it doesn't mean anything about your spirituality, the color of your skin, the race, ethnicity, like any of that. None of that.
Like, it's not a limitation.
It's not a
It's
limitation.
not a limitation, but it's not an idol. It should
Yeah,
add to your personhood, but it shouldn't be your identity.
yeah, yeah. It just adds like that extra little color, you know. It
It
just
adds to the human that you are, but it doesn't have an impact on your soul or
yeah,
eternity.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
I definitely agree with you on that. And that's like this is like a whole nother conversation for another time. But I think that like Christians are like, oh, we shouldn't be of the world. But it's like, yes, but we need to be in the world. So it's like now that you've come to this truthful realization, you still have to love other people where they are.
mm,
So
yeah.
I love that you added that.
Yeah, and I think that's another like fun thing. I know there's a lot of Christian parents that are like, "No, you can't read Harry Potter because it's about witchcraft," and it's like, okay, I get that. Like, yes, magic is evil, but you know, it talks about a lot of the reasons that magic is evil. You know, like Harry Potter specifically. Like, you have Voldemort and all these evil people who are using magic for bad things. It's like, yeah, I mean, eh, but it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, you don't have to let your child read Harry Potter, but you know, they're going to lose a talking point with their friends. It might take them
Yeah.
away from God, but they're also going to lose a talking point and not understand the world that they're living in right now. So I think
Or
there's merit in like viewing the media of the world and like seeing what the world believes and listening to the world's music and listening to all that
mhm.
stuff. Like, there's definitely merit to it because then you can figure out, oh, this is what the world is thinking right now about this specific thing. And this,
Yeah.
as a Christian, is how I'm going to address it.
And then yeah, and then you can test it with your faith. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be like a huge shock when you get into the real world. Like one of my roommates right now was not allowed to read, watch anything related to Greek mythology. And so we were watching Disney's Hercules one night and we were just kind of all talking about it. And I was like, I actually liked reading Greek mythology in like a part of my classes growing up because it's like, man, these gods and goddesses are so immature. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, why I would rather put my faith in like the one true God than
Yeah.
these really like human
Mhm.
like characters that don't exist, you know?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's like expose your children to the world. I mean, don't show them WAP, but like, you know, like expose them to the world so they know, like, hey, this is what the world says, but this is what God says about it. And I think that's like the best preparation that, you know, I mean, that's kind of how I grew up. Like, my parents, like, they were like, yeah, you can read Harry Potter if you want to. And of course, I was like, no, I'm too cool to read Harry Potter, which is a whole other issue that I already talked about. But, you know, it just, I don't know, like, expose yourself to the world, figure out what the world is thinking, because if you don't know what's going on in the world, you can't really minister to the world. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about recently. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't listen to the news because it totally is depressing. And it's like, okay, but you also, it is depressing. And that's why you need to pay attention to it because, you know, there's children being murdered and people being killed and there's like all kinds of terrible things happening. And you are the light and salt of the earth. Like, you need to be aware of the rot that there is so that you can throw it out or make it better. You know, like, I don't know. I don't know if that actually has anything to do with what we were talking about, but that's just some last little thoughts from me.
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I absolutely love recording with you. I every at the end of every episode I'm like, we need to do another one
Right?
because
Yeah.
I've been wanting to bring you back for one on being an activist because that was something that I feel like we went into college and I was like, nope, and here we are.
Mhm.
So,
I
yeah.
think the second that I thought, oh, I'm never going to be an activist was the second that everything began, you know? Like when we first
Exactly.
met, we were like, no, we'll never be activists. And then like literally that moment, I felt like there was like this thing of like, you're definitely going to be an activist now. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Nope. See, I said it out loud. And so that's definitely not what's going to happen. But, you know, God has very different plans than what I have. And he laughs at my plans and he says, you think you're
Oh yeah.
hilarious.
Oh
You don't get
yeah.
to speak something into existence because only he can do that. I'm like,
Autumn, thank you so much for joining us today. I absolutely love every time you come to record with us. So thank you.
I absolutely love being here and talking to you. And hopefully, some of what I said makes sense.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I love that we balance each other out though, because I
Yeah,
definitely need you in my life.
I need you in my life.
Oh my
I love
goodness.
having you here. I
Ah,
want to hug you. I
I'm
will crawl
gonna
through this camera
cry.
and hug you.
I'm gonna cry, man. I'm gonna cry.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna cry.
Okay.
I just love you too much.
I love you too much.
I love you.
Okay, guys, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, you can find all these episodes and podcast episodes on createworshipinspire.com, and you can even find the link to our Patreon page. And merch is now available for order, so you can go over to createworshipinspire.com to look at all of our cool stuff. Please be sure to comment down below with any suggestions that you have for future videos. And also, please be sure to like this video, share with a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already so they can hear the incredible things that Autumn had to say and also hear about how much I love her.
Aw.
And please be sure to follow Create Worship Inspire on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more exciting updates, and you can join our Discord server. See you
Woo.
next time.
See ya.